Tonight, after the job cuts, the politics.
They have done absolutely nothing to support these people in Thunder Bay.
Ontario's premier fires back at the federal government. We'll look at the strategy behind the blame game.
In our heart, we were trying to do the right thing for these victims.
A Trump cabinet secretary comes to his own defense. Is it enough to stop the calls for him to resign?
And the cry for soccer pay equity rises to a fever pitch. We'll go in depth on what it'll take to get there. This is The National. For politicians of various stripes, the Bombardier job losses have ignited a fight over who should have done more for the workers involved. But for those workers, the news confirmed today will hit much harder and closer to home. In Thunder Bay, Ontario, hundreds of them and their families know that layoffs are now just months away.
It's kind of the way of our trade, feast and famine.
The plant employs about 1,100 people. Half of them, 550, will be laid off starting November 4th.
Yeah, it's kind of, a little bit of a disappointment that we're doing so good now that we're all going to be bumped around, moved around.
Jobs are drying up because the work is. Two big projects, building rail cars for Metrolinx and streetcars for Toronto, will finish by next year. Add to that, Bombardier says, the Buy American policies in the U.S. force the plant to rely mostly on Canadian orders.
We need some contracts signed quickly.
But time is now an issue. Bombardier says even once a contract is signed, it can take a year or more to ramp up production.
I hope that, they can hang on to as many people as long as they can.
The federal Liberals and Ontario's Conservative Premier are trading barbs and accusations about the layoffs. That happened today, even as the premiers were meeting in Saskatchewan. As David Cochrane tells us, with a federal election looming, this kind of sniping is likely to get even more direct.
The premiers say they're in Saskatoon primarily to talk trade, but politics has a way of seeping in.
We aren't here to play politics like the federal government.
But that's exactly what's happening as Ontario and Ottawa blame each other for job losses at Bombardier.
They have done absolutely nothing to support these people in Thunder Bay.
It's a political blame game with hundreds of workers stuck in the middle. Ford says Ottawa has been slow to back his big money transit plan that would see the Thunder Bay plant building even more streetcars for Toronto.
To hear the Premier of Ontario misleading Ontarians and, in fact, employees, 550 employees of Thunder Bay with such empty words.
Ford did announce his transit plan.
We are here today to announce a $28.5 billion expansion to our province's transit network.
But hasn't sent Ottawa anything to sign.
There's been no application received at the federal government for concrete details about what they propose to do in terms of moving forward on transit in Toronto. There's been nothing but chaos, confusion, and paralyzation, quite frankly.
It's all politics at this point.
Not true, says Ontario's development minister, who insists transit projects in Vancouver and Montreal, where the Prime Minister personally made the announcement,
the federal government will be investing $1.3 billion.
Were fast-tracked.
It's just absolutely unfair, and it's just categorically wrong. Again, in Montreal and Vancouver, they were held to a very different and very low standard to get their billions of dollars approved instantly.
None of this solves the job problem in Thunder Bay or transit problems in Toronto, which has some suggesting both sides should just knock it off.
We need transit vehicles. People in Thunder Bay need jobs. The other two governments have money to help us buy the transit vehicles, and surely we can all sit down together and see if we can work out something.
So, David, Ottawa made Doug Ford the target today and not Bombardier. Give us a sense of what's behind that strategy.
Yeah, Rosie, this is all about the federal election. I mean, Doug Ford's numbers have absolutely tanked just 1 year into office, and he's dragging down the federal Conservatives with him in a lot of key Ontario ridings that are going to determine this next federal election. So the Liberals think the more they can keep the spotlight on Doug Ford, the better that is for them on Election Day, which, Rosie, tonight is 103 days away.
And how do the Conservatives counter the Liberal offensive, David?
Well, you know, Doug Ford has taken steps to avoid being a target. He's closed the Ontario legislature early. He's going to keep it closed until after Canadians vote in the fall. And he says he's going to keep a low profile in the federal campaign. That's his plan. That is not the Liberals' plan. They're going to do everything they can to try to keep him front and center.
Okay, that's David Cochran in Saskatoon tonight. Thanks, David.
You're welcome.
To Washington now, and 3 stories connected to Donald Trump. The city's mayor and the UK's ambassador made news. But first, let's look at the latest in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, the multimillionaire accused of sex trafficking. Today, the focus was on a Trump cabinet secretary who's been asked a lot of questions about it. Stephen D'Souza looks at how Alexander Acosta answered.
In our heart, we were trying to do the right thing for these victims.
Facing the media for the first time, Alexander Acosta defended the deal he gave sex offender Jeffrey Epstein 11 years ago, a deal critics call a slap on the wrist.
We did what we did because we wanted to see Epstein go to jail. He needed to go to jail.
Accused of recruiting and trafficking dozens of girls, Epstein spent just 13 months in jail, much of it on work release. In Acosta's telling, federal prosecutors rescued the case from state prosecutors, whom he says wanted to let Epstein walk. He said he faced a tough choice: go with a weakened deal or take a risk on scared witnesses at trial.
I know that in 2019, looking back on 2008, things may look different.
He sidestepped questions about why his office didn't further investigate allegations against Epstein, only saying he welcomed the new charges that emerged this week.
I'm glad to see that it's happening now. He's a bad man, and he needs to be put away.
But Florida state prosecutor at the time is pushing back, saying Acosta should have gone ahead with the 53-page indictment Acosta's own office drafted, instead of brokering a secret deal. That plea deal was kept secret from the victims, something a judge ruled broke the law. Acosta defended that decision, saying it was to protect victims' credibility if the case went to trial.
If we had had more transparency, perhaps this case would have gone differently.
That may be of little comfort to Epstein's accusers, even new ones like Jennifer Arose, who says Epstein raped her when she was just 15.
You knew very well my age. You knew exactly, who he was hanging out with.
Today's news conference was reportedly ordered by Donald Trump to give Acosta a chance to salvage his job. Now he waits to see if his words were enough for his critics or his boss. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, Washington.
The mayor of Washington has written to Donald Trump to say his pumped-up parade on the 4th of July has depleted her fund for security and fighting terror.
Today we come together as one nation with this very special salute to America.
Last Thursday's spectacle cost the city $1.7 million. That's about 6 times more than in previous years. The federal government is supposed to foot that bill, so Mayor Muriel Bowser asked Trump for repayment. She also asked for an additional $7.3 million related to Trump's inauguration celebration. More than 2 years later, she says that bill still is unpaid. Now to the latest twists in a diplomatic firestorm between President Trump and Great Britain. On Sunday, leaked messages revealed withering comments by Britain's ambassador. He called the Trump administration inept and said the president's career would end in disgrace. Chris O'Neill Yates has today's dramatic fallout.
This morning, after 3 days under a white-hot spotlight, top British diplomat Kim Darroch called it quits. Although my posting is not due to end until the end of this year, he said in a statement, I believe in the current circumstances, the responsible course is to allow the appointment of a new ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister Theresa May maintained her unwavering support for him while fretting about the damaging leak.
Sir Kim has given a lifetime of service to the United Kingdom, and we owe him an enormous debt of gratitude. Good government depends on public servants being able to give full and frank advice. I want all our public servants to have the confidence to be able to do that.
Foreign Office staff gathered this afternoon to show solidarity with Darroch.
Excuse me, gentlemen.
Others have been more measured. In last night's Conservative leadership debate, frontrunner Boris Johnson refused to say whether Darroch would stay on in Washington if Johnson becomes Prime Minister in 2 weeks. But today, he offered praise.
He was a superb diplomat, and I worked with him for many years. And I think that whoever leaked his diptels really has done a grave disservice to our civil servants, to people who give impartial advice to ministers. And I hope that whoever did it is run down, caught and eviscerated, quite frankly.
Since Trump refused to deal with Derek, an unprecedented move for an ally, according to officials here, the question is, did he have any choice but to quit?
I think the reality was that in light of the last few days, his ability to be effective was probably limited, so it's probably the right course.
The government has contacted the police, a spokesperson confirmed. An urgent hunt is on to find whomever is responsible for Derek's communications ending up on the front page of a British tabloid. Chris O'Neill-Yates, CBC News, London.
All right, Ian, you've been following some updates on that carbon monoxide leak at a Winnipeg motel.
And investigators, Rosemary, still trying to figure out exactly why it happened. What we do know is that it could have been so much worse. 52 people were inside the Super 8 when a carbon monoxide alarm went off. 46 were sent to hospital, 15 described in critical condition. That sounds dire, but we've learned that now all have been released. CBC News spoke to one of the motel's guests who said that he had an early sign that something was wrong. Cameron McIntosh has the latest.
It's back in business, though with plenty of investigators poking around, trying to figure out how poisonous carbon monoxide could leak through the building at dangerous levels.
We are still in the early stages of the investigation.
Their initial assessment?
It appears carbon monoxide built up in the building because of inadequate ventilation related to gas-fired appliances. Instead of being safely vented, exhaust was being drawn back into the building.
At 10:20 yesterday morning, a carbon monoxide alarm went off, alerting fire paramedics. 52 people were evacuated from the building, most taken to hospital, treated for various symptoms with no major injuries. Investigators want to know how long that colorless, tasteless, odorless carbon monoxide gas built up without being detected.
Carbon monoxide can very easily diffuse within the room air in the building. So it's very difficult to make any conclusion about where it started, how long it had been going on.
One guest says it must have been building up overnight. More than 3 hours before the evacuation, David Montgomery woke up with a headache.
I woke up at 7 a.m. and was really feeling all the symptoms, so it had been going on, during the night.
That's also a focus of the investigation. Manitoba requires carbon monoxide detectors in all hotels, but not in individual rooms. Owners of this building say everything is up to code. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Here's some of the other stories we're following tonight on The National. The family of former Bloc Québécois leader Gilles Duceppe is seeking more than $1 million in damages over the death of his mother. Hélène Rowley-Haute died in January after she was locked out of her apartment during a fire alarm. The 93-year-old suffered hypothermia in the snow and minus 35 temperatures. The family's lawyer says the actions of the seniors' home were irresponsible, negligent, and careless. The residence has 10 days to respond. A heartbreaking discovery for a woman in Ontario today. She was making lunch at her home in Oakville and went outside to find her mother and daughter unconscious in the pool. The 79-year-old grandmother was pronounced dead by emergency services. The 4-year-old girl now in critical condition. No other details have been released. The coroner will be investigating whether the woman had some sort of medical problem. We have an update now on the armed kidnapping of a Toronto area student. Wan Zhen Lu was attacked with a taser and forced into the back of a vehicle in the garage of a condo back in March. He was found 3 days later, 200 kilometers away, while today, police announced a fourth man has been arrested. The charges include kidnapping and assault. And a rescue mission to help 3 whales tangled in fishing gear has failed on its first attempt. One of the North Atlantic right whales was spotted from the air in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but crews had to turn around to refuel and they couldn't find it again. 6 right whales have been found dead so far this year in Canadian waters, 3 struck by ships. Countering disinformation, supporting laws guaranteeing a free press. Just a couple of the topics being discussed at an international conference in Britain that is co-hosted by Canada. But as Derek Stoffel tells us, one of the biggest concerns there is the increasing danger facing those gathering the news.
This conference comes at a time when not only media freedom is under threat, but when more than ever journalists themselves are at risk. Each square here represents one of the 99 journalists and media workers killed last year. Today, there's a focus on one of the most bold and brutal of the killings.
When Jamal Khashoggi, Washington Post columnist, was tortured to death and dismembered by Saudi Arabian officials in Istanbul, world leaders responded with little more than a collective shrug.
This United Nations human rights official found what she called credible evidence that Khashoggi's murder inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul last year is linked to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
We need courage.
Agnes Kalamar says the Saudis' poor record on media freedom should disqualify the country from hosting the G20 summit next year unless its leaders take responsibility for the killing.
Canada and other states first should bring the issue to the attention of Saudi Arabia and say to them that if those conditions are not being met, the meeting will be held elsewhere.
And there's more pressure on Canada, this time from Jamal Khashoggi's fiancée. In her first interview with Canadian media, Hatice Genghis called on Ottawa to help her find justice.
I want to see the government of Canada standing with me in this situation, the difficult situation.
We took those questions to Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland.
Minister, is it appropriate that such an important gathering take place in Saudi Arabia?
We do need to have places where we can meet and talk, even with those countries that are acting in ways that are 100% opposed to our values.
With more than a year until the G20 in Saudi Arabia is scheduled to take place, there are already calls for Canada to boycott, calls that likely will only grow louder. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, London.
When we come back, a champions parade and a call for equal pay. Their World Cup win is fueling the debate over how much female athletes are paid. So up next, we'll go in depth and look at the current playing field and what it would take to change it.
But first, heavy rains, flash flooding, tornado warnings, a possible hurricane. All of that has prompted Louisiana to declare a state of emergency. This was the scene in New Orleans this morning as severe storms swamped homes and streets.
We woke up and realized it was thundering and lightning, which was really cool until we looked outside and realized that our car was halfway underwater.
The city says some areas saw more than 20 centimeters of rain in just 3 hours.
We're just completely stranded here. I mean, we came down and this happened all within a matter of hours, and now no one can get anywhere.
This is ridiculous. It looks like Venice out here. Everybody need a boat or something. This is like sad. This is really sad.
Whoa!
There have been several reports of possible funnel clouds and water spouts. And here's an example of some of the damage.
When I opened the door, no ceiling. And then I went back to the bedroom, and the whole bedroom was blown out. And my wife and dog were kind of, they were under the rubble, but they were fine.
Forecasters are warning the situation is only going to get worse. A storm is gaining strength over the Gulf Coast that could turn into a hurricane by Friday or Saturday.
Now is absolutely the time to pay attention. Heed every single warning.
Officials say a storm surge could cause the Mississippi River to rise by 6 meters, and that would test the levees that protect the city.
These women's soccer players deserve every dollar that the men's soccer players received.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed legislation today to strengthen pay equity rules in his state. That was just ahead of the high-spirited parade celebrating the U.S. women's national soccer team for winning the World Cup. Cuomo declared that the women play the same game as the men, only better. Tonight, we're taking a deeper look at the pay gap between male and female athletes. Why is it that women on the U.S. soccer team can earn just 38 cents for every dollar made by a male player? But first, Kim Brunhuber shows us how the cry for equality rang out on the streets of Manhattan.
They rolled down Broadway, down the stretch known as the Canyon of Heroes, brandishing what they'd been sent to France to retrieve, the World Cup trophy. But in the end, this parade was about much more than just a game. They called for it with chants, with T-shirts, with signs. Equal pay, the subtext during the Women's World Cup tournament, now firmly front and center.
Our women are being ripped off, let's be clear. They are performing at the highest level, winning championships, bringing in tons of revenue, the highest ratings, and yet they're not getting fair pay. And this is unacceptable, and it needs to change now.
De Blasio, mayor and Democratic presidential candidate, announced today if elected he would sign an executive order to guarantee equal pay for male and female athletes. He rode on the main float with co-captain Megan Rapinoe, hers the loudest voice calling for change.
I think the men's side of sports just in general is seen as this exciting opportunity, business opportunity that needs to be invested in. The women's is like, how cheap can we do this while, sort of keeping them happy?
The U.S. Soccer Federation says women and men are paid differently due to their collective bargaining agreements. The women get an annual salary of $100,000 plus bonuses. The men don't get annual salaries, but they do get larger bonuses for wins or draws.
U.S. Soccer has invested more in women's soccer than any country in the world.
That's U.S. Soccer Federation President Carlos Cordero being booed at today's parade. And the federation that today was lauding its women champions still has to contend with the team's lawsuit seeking equal pay.
The highest honor New York City gives, the key to the city.
At the end of the ceremony, the team members were all given keys to the city.
Soon enough, you're going to need to change your locks.
And there are still many more doors left to open. Kim Brunhuber, CBC News, Los Angeles.
So as we mentioned, we're going more in depth on this story tonight. Joining me in studio to kick around this equal pay story is Shireen Ahmed. She's a sports activist and writer, and John Molinaro, a soccer journalist and author. Okay, I want to start with some numbers just to give people a sense of the big differences here between men and women's game. For instance, nearly 4 times as many people watch the Men's World Cup. The revenue for the men's game, 45 times greater. And the men's winning team in the next World Cup will get a lot more than the women did this year. And on the final note, Lionel Messi has a net worth 150 times greater than Alex Morgan, the U.S. Co-captain of the American team. So those are just some stark facts about what we're dealing with here. But let me start by asking you both the same question. Why are the women paid differently? John, you want to start?
Well, in terms of the U.S. Women's team,
yeah.
They negotiated a different CBA with the U.S. Soccer Federation.
CBA, a deal.
A collective bargaining
Right.
agreement, yeah, with the U.S. Soccer Federation, which is, they have a base salary of $100,000, and then they have bonuses, but their bonus structure is a lot less than the U.S. The men's team, who don't have a base salary, but obviously their bonuses are quite higher. So the better that the men's team does, the more they earn. But the women will argue that they have to play far more games and be competitive for far longer to be on par money-wise with the men's.
So what is the equal pay then about? Getting the same as the men, pure and simple, because they're doing the same sport?
I think it's a little more complicated than that. It's not simply about the money. It's a lot about valuing the work that women are actually doing. If we're going to talk about revenue and we're going to talk about streams, the kit that the women have is the highest selling kit in the history of Nike Sports in the United States. The most watched game in the United States for a long time was the 2015 World Cup final between Japan and the United States. So if we're talking about that, we're talking about money that the women actually make. $50.8 million between 2016 and 2018 was more than revenue generated by the men. So if you're going to ask me what that is, I'm going to tell you it's inequality and not actually valuing the equal work that women are doing that they deserve.
Right, okay, but globally, certainly men's soccer is a bigger revenue generator. So some people might say, if you are bringing in more money, you deserve to be paid more money. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I get that argument. What I would say is, with regards to FIFA, I mean, the pot for the Men's World Cup is $400 million, and $32 million of that went to the winners last year of France. You compare that to the entire pot for this year's Women's World Cup was $30 million. So the winning champion from last year won more sort of pool money than the entire sort of tournament.
Yeah.
If the men do, there's no doubt the Men's World Cup draws more revenue, more interest. I still think that disparity between the two sort of is way out of whack.
And is it because really this isn't just about them making money now, but this is about sort of structural sexism built into sport? I mean, is that what's really at issue?
Well, if you look at the history of what FIFA's done to grow and advance the women's game, it's not a whole lot, to be quite honest. And women get funded also from their federations under the umbrella. This is important to remember. I mean, we have to place the blame equally. But FIFA has not done what it needs to. The confederations don't hold them in the same regard. There's a lot of disparity in pay. There's a lot of disparity, not just in pay, with how much they train officials that are women, give opportunities, coaching opportunities to women, develop women's and youth programs, young girls. It's not across equal at all.
So it's about marketing, promotion, training, getting the whole system changing.
Well, exactly. If you want a world-class product, you have to invest in it. You can't expect the women who have already done mountains with like nothing to be able to keep giving you something if you don't invest in it.
Have you ever seen, John, a team mobilize around a policy issue, like take a stand on something like this? I know they did in 2015 unsuccessfully, but do you think that this is a turning point for them?
The only thing I can think of in recent times is the situation with Colin Kaepernick in the NFL, and sort of like, maybe not his entire team rallied around him, but certainly people, athletes from around the NFL and other leagues sort of rallied around him. I think this is, unique in that, it's a women's team at the forefront. It's the best women's team in the history of like women's soccer. The whole situation with Donald Trump, and they're sort of taking him on as well. I think they're in a unique place right now, and I think they're slowly kind of gaining public support because we're sort of in the era of women's empowerment and Me Too and everything. So I think that works all in their favor.
Shireen?
Globally speaking, there's a lot of precedent for doing this. The Argentine Women's Federation sued their employer. We saw the way Brazil was treating in Denmark. The women went on strike and actually missed the World Cup because they missed a qualifier. Ada Hegerberg actually skipped out on the World Cup in protest because she didn't feel that the Norwegian Federation was providing enough resources or strategizing enough to improve. So there's a lot of precedent with women around the world. The Super Eagles of Nigeria actually staged a sit-in because they were due money that they didn't get from previous tournaments before. So there is a history of women rallying and actually resisting against this in women's football.
What about Canada? If this were to come to pass in the United States, I know it's not the same. We're not playing at the same level. We're not world champions. But would there be a case then for Canadian women players to say, hey, we deserve to be paid more as well?
It's a difficult one. I don't think the Canadian team is in sort of the same sort of leverage, in terms of what the U.S. has, just because the U.S. is coming off 2 consecutive World Cups. That might be something for them to think about. And they have had sort of pay disputes with, Canada Soccer before. But I'm not sure that they're in the same position as the U.S. to really sort of like make a go of it.
Do you think it will happen in the U.S. and then spur on other change?
I think the U.S. is setting an incredible precedent and they're inspiring movement or mobilization around the world. In regards to Canada, Canada actually has unionized the women's team and they've got a bargaining agreement. And Erin McLeod had said it's the best one that they've actually ever had. But that being said, it's important to keep in mind that there's different levels of this. Let's invest in the women's game, not just about equal play, but invest in the development. We are the only team in the top 10 FIFA ranking, and I'm speaking of Canada, that doesn't have a domestic women's league. So our women go and play in the United States or they play in Europe. You want to grow the game, it has to be in different ways.
Is this really just about the same fight, though, that women have through society about trying to get equal pay for equal work, fundamentally?
It's about respect. It's about valuing the work that women do. It's about social change in terms of understanding, getting the supports they need in terms of health benefits, maternity leave, all kinds of things. There's some teams that don't actually have full-time medics. They don't have full-time press. They don't have full-time photographers or whatnot. Like, these are basic things that men's teams don't have to think about.
I think she's absolutely right. It's about that sort of just basic respect, and this is how you get it. It's incrementally by, each time taking a stand and making use of the power that you have. And I think, in this era of social media and everything too, I think the U.S. has, they've been great in terms of sort of the way they've leveraged their popularity and power and say, we're not going to stay quiet about this, and we are going to sort of, we're not just going to simply stick to sports. We're going to speak out about this.
It's fascinating to watch. Thank you both. I appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
Next on The National, the future of the Chateau Laurier is still up for debate. We'll take a closer look at the plans over an addition to this Canadian landmark and why not everyone is excited. Former Toronto Raptor Danny Green says some of his possessions were stolen while he was visiting Vancouver. He was in town last week for a skills camp for young players and says someone broke into his car.
We didn't know there was like a ghetto or a hood in Vancouver. I was just a hood everywhere. And then, so we go check out the Airbnb. We go back outside and pretty much not robbed of everything, but 2 book bags gone.
That is Green talking on an episode of his podcast. He says the car was parked on the city's downtown east side. They lost laptops, electronics, and cash from camp registration. Police say they are investigating.
Oh my God.
Well, people in Atlanta couldn't believe their luck. The side door of an armored truck flew open last night and an estimated $175,000 blew onto the road and into nearby woods. Now, if you're wondering, yes, taking money in these circumstances is a crime. One driver did turn in the $2,000 he says he picked up. Police are asking others to do the same. Concerns today about the health of the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, after she was seen shaking at a public event for the 3rd time in less than a month. Merkel was standing alongside Finland's Prime Minister during a ceremony in Berlin today. After this incident, Merkel said that she was very well. There was no need to worry. Canadian astronaut David Saint-Jacques was given a hero's welcome at the Canadian Space Agency today. Thunderous applause greeting the Quebec native after he spent a record-breaking 6 months in space. Saint-Jacques says he's working on reintegrating to life back on Earth and will soon head back to Houston, where he'll resume his work with the space program. If you've been to Ottawa, you almost certainly have seen the Chateau Laurier. Tonight, the famous hotel is at the center of a fierce debate over design. Standing right next to Parliament Hill, it is a landmark, but a proposed addition to the building has residents there fuming, organizing, fighting back. As Kate Porter tells us, they have some choice words for this new look.
Here's what the fight is about. A design from the hotel's Vancouver-based owner, Larco Investments, has been called grotesque and compared to a shipping container.
I call it a radiator.
This former resident of 24 Sussex is one of many high-profile Canadians lobbying to stop it.
It is a specially designated, both federally and provincially, and I think that that's something that the Larco people have to understand and perhaps be a little less tone-deaf.
This would be unconscionable in Washington, D.C. It would be unconscionable in London or other world capitals. But here in Ottawa, we're going to accept that? I don't think so.
The company has listened. This is its 5th proposed design. It obstructs the views less than the others and has more limestone, but critics say that's not good enough.
It does strike me as very kind of 1960s design, looks like a Cold War sort of bunker, and it doesn't strike me as something for a hotel, let alone on such a beautiful part of our capital city.
I think it looks very new, too new. Takes away from like the old architecture.
The design was approved last year. Today, a last-ditch attempt at City Council to change that.
Do 2 wrongs make a right here? And they don't.
But even after 3 votes, the decision was put over to tomorrow. Ottawa's mayor doesn't like the design either, but wants to let it go ahead and move on.
A few years down the road when this thing is built and everyone's on the first tour of the buildings and the new rooms and the look of the thing, I think there'll always be critics, but I think there'll also be people who say, you know what, it's not as bad as we thought.
Despite the uproar, the owner says it's sticking with this last design, saying it's done everything City Hall asked it to do. So, barring any further roadblocks, it seems this National Historic Site will get its modern addition, reviled as it may be. Kate Porter, CBC News, Ottawa.
Up next on The National, a fix for an aging population.
Sometimes we are first response. If a call was to come in and the person states when they called, I have no injuries, I just want help up, I've fallen.
How many times does that happen?
It does a lot.
We'll hit the road with a new emergency response team, but first, in case you missed it, so you think you can dance. Snowball the cockatoo is back in the spotlight after going viral a decade ago. Not only was the dancing bird enough to break the internet back then, but researchers at Tufts University have been studying his every move ever since. And this week, they published their new findings.
He does stuff that you would just never see a parrot doing in the wild. Some of these moves just astonished us. The head bang, the vogue. Yeah, the vogue was amazing.
And don't forget the side to side or the body roll. Turns out this bird can shake his tail feathers 14 different ways.
We just played him 2 songs. Another One Bites the Dust by Queen. Another One Bites the Dust. And Girls Just Want to Have Fun by Cyndi Lauper. And just let the camera go. He kind of experimented around and came up with these things, possibly partly through imitation of humans, possibly partly through his own creativity.
So not only does Snowball dance to the beat, but he has his own moves. His next test, does he prefer dancing with friends or by himself? And researchers, well, they've already got a song in mind for that.
I'm Jamie Poisson. Tomorrow on CBC's daily news podcast Front Burner, as Canada speaks out against conversion therapy, a glance into the reality of the practice with someone who has experienced it firsthand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
The risk of slips and falls can often be overlooked, but for older Canadians, it can be devastating, even life-changing. And that's prompted a lot of work by researchers at hospitals and universities. Well, tonight we revisit a story we brought you earlier this year about what's being done to create safe spaces for seniors. Here's Cass Rusi with The Fix.
My Grad 2363.
2043 on 042, Unit 33. Welland, 230 Helm Down.
We're on the road in Ontario's Niagara region with a unique emergency response team.
The lifeline call originally for an 81-year-old female.
A team with a singular focus, responding only to emergency calls from seniors who've fallen.
He had possible nose fracture.
Now when paramedic Eric Huffman is dispatched, Leslie Yole, an occupational therapist, is right by his side.
Sometimes we are first response. If a call was to come in and the person states when they called, I have no injuries, I just want help up, I've fallen.
How many times does that happen?
It does a lot.
Hoffman and Yole arrive at the home of an 81-year-old woman in Welland.
So we're a new program.
She lives alone and doesn't want to go to the hospital. This isn't her first fall. Hoffman checks the woman's medication because some prescribed drugs can contribute to the risk of falls.
Your foot sore?
Yole finds out that the senior fell from her walker while reaching for a cell phone. A quick check of the apparatus and she spots the problem.
Even when this brake was on, the wheels move in here. That's not good.
A simple repair job does the trick.
You know what? If I can prevent the next fall, that's why I'm here. If I can keep her safe, she wants to be in her home. She's quite an independent lady.
Falls are the leading cause of injury for seniors, responsible for 32% of all reported emergency department visits in 2017. A financial burden on healthcare, costing more than $2 billion. These images of real-life falls are from long-term care facilities in the Vancouver area. They're difficult to watch, but provide valuable clues for researchers at Simon Fraser University in how and why falls occur in older adults.
We specifically focus on what are the 2 most important injuries related to falls: hip fracture and traumatic brain injury.
One of the experiments his researchers conduct involves a giant moving platform nicknamed the Slipatron that's able to move in different directions and at different speeds.
Ready?
A fall is induced. Again. And again. And again.
Interesting how you're completely knees there, no hands.
Sensors on the volunteer's body measure the fall, and infrared cameras record it all in 3D, allowing researchers to further study things like the speed, direction, and impact of the fall.
Some older adults who have sensory impairment or are on certain medications, they're constantly in a state of trying to maintain their balance, having to recover their balance.
But while researchers like Rabinovich concentrate on the science of falls, it's almost impossible to measure the emotional toll it can take. Erin Harris was fit and active all of her life until a tumble down a flight of stairs changed that.
I was walking 5 miles a day, forever, and it went down to one street.
It took her several weeks to recover from a broken ankle, but it took her years before she felt safe enough to reclaim her old life. Now she's determined not to have it happen again.
I decided to train like an athlete again, and that meant anything and everything that was offered to me.
She enrolled in a falls prevention program at the Toronto Rehabilitation Institute.
It just allowed me to focus on my balance, my flexibility, my adaptability to change, and I was very grateful for that.
As seniors like Erin work to fight their fear of falling,
this is our general purpose lab.
Where these accidents happen is also being studied. The main culprit? The bathroom, with all of its hard and slippery surfaces. More than 70% of falls happen getting in and out of the tub.
Bathing disability is a huge issue, and it's one of the primary reasons that an older adult will have to leave their home. So if we really do want to support this idea of aging in place, the bathroom is one of the areas we have to address.
Alison Novak and a team of researchers at Toronto Rehab have been working on making bathrooms safer, and in their latest research, the focus is on grab bars.
Should it be present? Should it be mandatory? How many falls will it prevent? And then if it should be mandatory, where should it be placed? How long should it be?
This simulated bathroom is held up by hydraulic lifts in a hangar that looks straight out of NASA. 73-year-old Gary Evans is the recruit.
Bit of unsteadiness there.
Right.
By slipping, researchers can study how quickly the volunteer is able to recover and hold on to the grab bar.
Hi, Anna.
Back in Niagara, Leslie Yole and Eric Huffman are still on the road. They've dropped in on a senior they've met before.
Try and get onto your hands and knees.
She's known as a frequent faller.
Whenever you're ready, we'll try to get up towards the couch.
Yole wants to see how she's doing and give her some pointers on how to get up from a spill. It's still early, but officials say the falls team is already making a difference.
Hard work, eh?
There's been fewer visits to the emergency rooms. And while the program doesn't promise to prevent the first fall, its goal is to make sure there are no further ones. Cass Rusi, CBC News, Niagara.
Up next on The National, our moment. A Newfoundland restaurant is giving meals away for free. Find out why just ahead.
I seen a Facebook ad and I thought it was absolutely incredible what they're doing for the people, low income here in the city.
You call me Mr. Kim out of respect or because you forget my name?
God, this tea is incredible.
My name is Sang-il, my very good friend.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Peter Boland goes to the same restaurant at the same time every afternoon. It's called Big Bite Pita in St. John's, Newfoundland, and Peter never has to pay. That's because from 3 to 4 every afternoon, the restaurant owners keep a promise they've made. A small sign on their front door reads, "Free meals for the homeless," and it's making a difference in people's lives. And because of that, it's our moment.
When they come, some people, they don't want to say, we don't have money, But when they see the sign, they come and see like, okay, can we have a free meal? This is like symbol for them to say it.
I seen a Facebook ad and I thought it was absolutely incredible what they're doing for the people, low income here in the city. It's always appeared right in front of you. Incredible people here, incredible.
This is what I mean, like it's safe. They like it's guaranteed to come in and take the food if they're hungry or they have no money.
When all the pain in the world, the real depression hits, there's somewhere, there's like a family here kind of thing. It really is. It's really a community that you don't see anymore, right?
So a couple things. The owners of the restaurant are Syrian refugees who came to Canada 3 years ago. And they started this because a man walked in and said, I've got $3. What can I get for $3? And they thought, well, we need to fix this.
And you know, one of the things I like about this story, Rosie, is it's not just the restaurant, although they obviously deserve a lot of credit for this commitment they have every single day in the afternoon, but also restaurant patrons, if that's what you call people that go to the big pita, you know, donate money as well, right? And I'm sure it happens in Toronto. I see it here in Vancouver. In this block, there's a fast food restaurant, and I would say every couple of days I see people, just strangers, who are buying food for other people. So no one obviously should be hungry.
Yeah, heartwarming.
We had an interesting debate yesterday online, people wondering what goes in the moment, whether we should chat after the moment. I think this was a good chat.
It was. Thank you.
That is The National for July 10th. Good night.
Good night.